Hello. How is everyone doing? If this is your first time watching, this is Started Up Wednesday, where we chat with startup founders about their startup journeys, and figure out like more about our own journeys if we want to get into the startup industry, or I mean not the startup industry, but if we wanted to build our own startups, or just more about how we can probably even leverage their products. Before we get into this particular startup and learning about our guest today, I did want to let you all know about the GitHub for Startups program. GitHub for Startups helps your startup go from idea to IPO on the world's largest and most advanced developer platform. Eligible startups receive 20 seats of GitHub Enterprise free for 12 months, but they also receive tailored product guidance, mentorship, and even opportunities like this to be on our Twitch stream. So if you are interested in, if you have a startup or you are interested in joining the GitHub for Startups program, please check that out. And I will give you the link at the end of the show. But without further ado, I do want to introduce our guest today, Elena. Hi, Elena.
Hi, Roselle. Hi, everyone.
Hey, do you feel free to like introduce yourself? I don't know why my words are like getting all confused today, but I will get it together.
No worries. So, hi, everyone. Really happy to be here today. My name is Elena. I'm CEO and co-founder of Evidently, which is an open source tool, so you can find it directly on GitHub for data scientists and machine learning engineers that helps monitor machine learning models in production. I've been doing this specific startup for more than 2 years now, but before that, I've spent quite a while in applied machine learning, previously at a larger company, and then doing another startup focused on industrial manufacturing. So yeah, I can talk a lot about doing startups, about machine learning, and hopefully some of you might be interested in the product that we develop. It's free, it's open source, so all the things that developers should like.
We love open source. I love to see it, and I'm excited to learn more about your journey. Also, for folks in the audience or watching, feel free to like put in where you are watching in from, or if you have any questions. I love when my streams are more me interacting with the audience and not just me talking at them. I do see someone named Videsh said he's tuning in from India, so thank you so much for joining in. Okay, so you said that you work at the startup that's open source. Tell us what it is and what does it do?
Right. Yeah, so probably I should start a little bit with machine learning. So we're existing in the world of so-called ML ops. It's a sort of like a variation of a DevOps, right? So what GitHub does and many other companies do. When you create a machine learning system, imagine that it's like a model that recommends something. Maybe it like predicts demand so that later you can like deliver logistics. Maybe it recommends what to show to which visitor on the website and like upsell, cross-sell something. So when you have this system and it's already being used, you need to make sure that it actually works. So you need monitoring. And we're not talking here about traditional software monitoring, even though this is important, you still have to do it, right? Like, is the service working? Like, what's the uptime, latency, this sort of things. But when you have a machine learning system, there's like additional layers to monitor, which are related to the data that is coming in the system and to the quality of the model itself. And this is what we do. So we build a tool that helps you monitor machine learning models in production. And for example, things can go wrong. Like might have like wrong data. It might look differently to before. Maybe the model is giving like unreasonable predictions or recommendations, which is outside of expected range. Maybe there's like a new segment of your users where the model doesn't work correctly. And this not even talking about like major issues such as model bias or potential for like downstream negative impact from incorrect model predictions. So it's kind of like what you do for software with an added thing of how do you monitor this unpredictable sometimes systems that just learn from the data so you don't have full control over how they work.
That is so interesting. I never really thought of the fact because I've been diving into AI, but I haven't been diving that deep into machine learning. And I haven't really thought of the fact that ML, like why ML ops is needed, because like you just said, like they're kind of learning on their own. You don't have much control over that. So to be able to have that control, your product is embedded in or used to be able to like monitor when things are going wrong, because things can go wrong. That's like a really interesting use case.
Yeah. It's not just they can go wrong, they will actually go wrong. You know it from day one that you would need to update and retrain your model. So it's not like a one and done sort of thing. You created it, it works perfect. It's not just like,
Yes.
deterministic software. The data
Yeah.
is new, the users are new, the behavior is new, so you would need to constantly maintain it. And this is like the boring part, but I mean essential part, right?
Yeah. Interesting. I don't know if this question is like maybe off topic or difficult, but someone did ask what's the difference in between DevOps and ML ops. And from what you described so far, and feel free to like expand on it, right? For me, as a developer, I know that DevOps is more of like how do we make the infrastructure and the experience of a developer easier, right? So instead of just like we have to like manually maybe deploy a product into production or software into production, we have like CI/CD in place that helps to streamline that process. And we have other different tools that help to remove human error. But it kind of sounds like ML ops helps to remove machine learning error, or reduce it and automate those processes. I'm not sure. Feel free to expand because I have
No,
no knowledge.
that's a great way of putting this. I think in spirit, it is the same, right? So DevOps is made to make the life of the developers easier. MLOps
Yeah.
is made to make the life of machine learning developers and data scientists easier. So it's essentially the same. But in terms of like what exactly you do and what's included in MLOps, you have like this added layer, which is more,
Yeah.
well, if you want to add another abbreviation, it's data ops, right? So you have to move a lot of data. It's not necessarily existing in traditional software development, right? And this
Gotcha.
ML model specific components. So the development cycle for machine learning models looks slightly different. You still have the
Yeah.
traditional software component if you deploy it somewhere, but like you need to experiment on your models, run and log the results of this experiment, then package them for deployment, then monitor it, then retrain it, then rinse and repeat it. So there is, of course, CI/CD there that you do just the same, but then you also have like all these additional things that, yeah, well, ML specific.
Gotcha. Interesting. Wow, I'm learning so much. I'm learning a lot. Okay, so some people from the audience did say where they're tuning in from. I do want to highlight because I think the diversity and where people are watching in from is awesome. We have people from Minneapolis here in the US, the UK, South Africa, Cape Town, DC, Nigeria. So many people. Oh, I think I was going fast and you were saying hi to someone from the Netherlands.
I was UK, Team UK.
Oh, gotcha. Team USA. So we've got like such a diversity of people. Thank you for tuning in, y'all. I'm actually curious. So like Now we kind of understand what your startup is. What inspired you to be a co-founder in this project? I know you said you have experience in ML in the past, so curious about that journey.
Yeah. So many reasons. One is I do love startups. I mean, you have to love doing things from scratch in a slightly unpredictable environment. Of course, you can do this also, like maybe in some corporation, you have specific role which is limited to that. But I just enjoy building things from scratch, right? So I was bound to do something on my own. This is on the personal level. Another part is that, well, I found a very great opportunity that I thought is like worth pursuing, and I have an amazing co-founder. So I think like all these three things together, they kind of made sense for me. But yeah, it's not like a deterministic journey. I was not like planning to be an entrepreneur, for example, in my life from the early days.
I love it. Oh, that's interesting that that wasn't like your plan for all your life. Because some people, there are some people that I've met that are like, I've always wanted to be
Yeah.
a founder or whatever, and like you just you kind of found your way into this. It led to this over time. Um, cool. I'm curious if you would like to maybe do a demo or show us what this looks like. And it doesn't have to be super technical, just like an overview if you wanted.
Yeah, I think I can do this. I would be very interested to learn like how many people in the audience actually doing machine learning or data science. Maybe someone can just write. It would be also
Ooh.
interesting to know. But in the meantime, yes, let me share my screen and share an example. So hopefully you can see it now. What I'm sharing with you now is a Google Colab because, well, I'm not a technical co-founder, so I don't have anything installed on my computer. I'm just running everything in the cloud. Evidently is an open source Python library. So to install Evidently, you just do something like pip install, or you can do it from Conda. I will not bore you with this detail. And what I'm doing right now is also importing this data. This is just for demonstration purposes, so it have like some sample data set. But imagine that it is related to a problem where you want to predict something. Here, specifically, we are predicting bike demand. So like in cities like Amsterdam, like when you have a bike place somewhere in the city, you might want to predict how many bikes will be rented so that you know how many bikes to put somewhere logistically. So this is just a kind of toy demo problem. But if you're working with something like this, you might run daily predictions on a data set that looks somehow similar. So this is some tabular data set, and then there is like a column called count, which you're trying to predict. If you have a real-world machine learning problem, you would typically have logs like this from your actual model prediction. Here, for the demonstration purposes, we just took some data and we split it into 2 weeks, or into 2 parts. Each has like 4 weeks in January and 4 weeks in February. The reason I'm doing it is that how you monitor machine learning models, you often want to compare the data that comes into the model right now to the data that you saw previously, because you assume that the model will perform fairly well if the data is similar. But if something has changed in the input data, this is a strong signal that you might want to look at your model and tune it or somehow react to potential changes. So here is just a demonstration. Again, we split the data into 2 parts. This is some data set starting in 1st of January, and this is some data set starting on the 29th of January of some, well, quite a few years ago. This is what Evidently need to kind of start the evaluations that work, that we can implement in the tool. I'm just showing one specific example, which is called data drift report. So, and this is where Evidently shows all its capabilities. To create a report and to identify what has changed in your data, you basically need to pass data to Evidently. We split it into reference and current data sets. And then you just say, hey, Evidently, please calculate this data drift for me. And you will get a report like this, which basically shares where there are changes in your data set, how many columns in your data set look differently to before. And if you want to look into detail, you can, for example, expand here in a particular column and see the change in the data distribution. This is something that can be meaningful to someone who works on the model. You would notice that, for example, humidity has changed, the temperature has changed, and this is signals that there is a change in the outside world. Of course, these reports are very nice and colorful, and you might want to share that even with business stakeholders, with data scientists. But if you want to run this as a regular automated service, you can run a test suite, which is another capability of Evidently. So for example, imagine every day you get a new batch of data and you want to compare it to the data yesterday. And you also want to check if the quality of the data is the same. For example, there are no absent values, there are no duplicated columns or some other issues that might be introduced just due to some bugs in the pipeline. With Evidently, it's like super easy to create a test suite that combines these checks. So you literally just list what you want to test. You might specify specific expectations, or you can just show the example of the previous batch and we will derive it automatically. And then you will get a report that summarizes for you, like, okay, we know that out of 8 tests that we ran, 7 were successful, and then 1 was failing because there is a statistical distribution drift in columns. This is basically the essence of the library. This is what works on the backend of Evidently, and there are around 100 different metrics and tests that we implemented. And you can, of course, deploy it and integrate with other tools that you use. In the spirit of open source, we integrate with a lot of other open source tools that you might use in your data or machine learning pipelines. In most cases, you can also export the metrics and just log them somewhere. So you would use Evidently as a metric computation backend. And for example, if you're a data engineer, you might be using a tool like Airflow. It's just an orchestrator or scheduler that helps you execute tasks and run Evidently check on a schedule or dependent on some pipeline. Or maybe you want to host it with a tool like Streamlit, which is a front-end visualization tool in Python. You can do this. Or if you are a software developer, you might be familiar with Grafana. You can also send these metrics to Grafana. So in essence, Evidently is a tool that helps you evaluate a lot of different metrics regarding model quality, data drift, and I just showed just a few of them, but of course there are many others. And we try to implement a lot of checks that are valuable for many different models, and also do this with the help of community. I hope this makes sense.
No, that was a great demo. For someone like me who doesn't know anything about machine learning or like thinking about the data in that way, I think it was really great. I did ask folks, I just want to like re-highlight it to everyone, how many of you all are doing work in the machine learning or AI space? Just because Elena was curious and we want to know. I did see some people like they just commented and they said, "Oh, I think you're using Google Collab." That's
Yes.
Perdumna saying that, and then I think someone asked what model are you using, but I don't know how to answer that. Is it? I thought the model you were using was evidently AI, but I don't really know.
We didn't really use any model because we were just looking at the data, and then yes, he used Evidently to evaluate this data.
Gotcha. Cool.
There was no extra
Yeah.
model.
No external model, y'all. She used Google Colab to basically look at the data there. Okay, cool. That was really interesting, and I think I'm even more curious about like your just general journey into um machine learning. Like, oh, I know like I think you mentioned it a little bit. Like your first role in machine learning and like how that spurred your passion that you're like, yeah, I will totally want to continue working in the space and just be like running a company around it.
Yeah. So I was always choosing in my life like the least beaten path, sort of, and that's how it's brought me to where I am right now. So about 11 years ago, I joined Yandex, which has basically Google in Russia, and it was doing a lot of search engine related stuff. And at some points, they started a department focused on applying machine learning outside of search. And the idea was back then, there was not even like discussion around machine learning, but some large tech companies, including Yandex, Google, were obviously using it a lot. And I would join this department just because I thought it's a cool idea to pursue, and it's very interesting to try to figure out new ways of applying certain technology. And that's what we were doing for a few years. I basically learned everything on the job, let's say, right? So in how different technologies work inside, how different companies want to use them and try to implement it. And well, that's how I got introduced in the world. And back then, there were not that many experts in machine learning, so it was easy to start becoming one. I think like every new technological wave brings you this opportunity, just like now with large language models, right? No one knows anything about applying them yet on a large scale, right? So there is a chance to learn it. So is everyone trying to do a startup now? That's a good moment to choose whatever is currently the least beaten path. So following this, yeah, we've been working on very different applications from manufacturing to, traditional online ad optimization sort of things. And after leaving Yandex, we founded a startup focused on applying machine learning in industrial production, in things like steel making, oil and gas. So it was like a very broad spectrum, let's say, of potential applications that I've seen. And back when we were working on our previous startup, we had to rebuild so many things internally because there was no MLOps. It was not even a word. So every team that was doing some machine learning were re-implementing something, like reinventing the wheel, trying to figure out the ways to do it more efficiently. And that's how kind of stumbled on the idea of building tools for those who build models, particularly focused on monitoring, because that was the moment when a lot of companies started doing this in production. And to mention a very important point, my co-founder, Emily, the CTO and co-founder of Evidently, was also part of all these previous stories. So we worked together on the previous startup. So the big decision why we want to pursue this is because I believe we're a great team and we are solving the problem that we are familiar both from the technical standpoint and from the business and product standpoint.
Such an exciting story that you started off at Yandex, and that's how you learned on the job all about machine learning, and you kind of got yourself in at a earlier good moment. And then after that, you went to a startup with your co-founder, your now co-founder, and you all realized, hey, there's like these missing parts to machine learning that we could help to build up. I really love this. And I think like although machine learning 11 years ago was really new, I think it's still a little bit new where some people are still like they don't even really understand the difference between
Yeah,
AI and machine learning. Yeah. So it's awesome.
yeah. No, it's true. Back then, it was a lot about like talking about big data. Then at some point, people started talking about machine learning. Then AI. Of course, it's just semantics. Technology is probably and very frequently the same. But if I want to give an advice to someone who is listening and considering doing a startup, I think like just like pursuing your curiosity and like getting into new things is the best way to do this, right? Because you can spot some opportunities which are just arising. They could not exist a year ago because there was no such market need, no problem to solve.
I love that. Just going with your own curiosity and exploring things and building off of that. And I like what you pointed out about like LLMs because I have seen different types of tweets. Some tweets saying, gotta get into AI now because this is the stage to know everything. And then some tweets saying like AI's been around for a long time. But I think the way that you put it is great. Is like, yeah, AI's been around for a little bit. However, LLMs and generative AI haven't been around as long. And this is a great time to like learn at an early stage, like the foundational stage of AI, and then be able to impact the direction that it's going in, especially thinking about like responsible AI, like around the ethics around it. Because right now we're just creating whatever. Someone did answer your question around like if they're working in machine learning, and their name's Alessandro, and they said they're doing deep learning in the Netherlands, working on object detection at main blades. Cool.
That's great. Yeah. I
um
love the reality of machine learning that often you do something that sounds actually extremely boring. But this is the reality of like, okay, there's a amazing technology which sounds so fascinating, but then you have to
yeah,
figure out very real world applications for it, right? And the type of use cases I worked on in this like optimization of steel production, right? Or object detection, or just like sorting out support tickets more efficiently. It sounds a bit less exciting, but this is what makes a lot of opportunities for startups as well, right? You can figure out the boring problem that you want to solve and automate it with this awesome technology on the back end.
yeah, that's so true. It doesn't have to be something super exciting. It could be something that's like, oh, okay, it's not, you know, like it's nothing like revolutionary, but it is because it's
It
making
is.
things easy for people. Yeah, and I actually think like object detection and stuff like that sounds cool to me because like how can a computer or a machine be able to detect an object? Like that seems like something only a human would be able to do, and like I still think it sounds like mind blowing. Um, okay, so Mike, before we started the stream, I think you brought up Y Combinator, and I'm curious to know about your experiences in Y Combinator. was it beneficial to you, or do you encourage people to join like accelerator programs like GitHub for Startups or Y Combinator to help their journeys?
Uh, Totally recommend. So even if you don't get in, I think even the experience of applying for this sort of programs is very, very beneficial because it just brings your thoughts in order. You know, you have to like take a look at your startup and present it for someone and explain what it does. It will help you with anyways with investors, with your users. But going back to Y Combinator, so we did it a couple of years ago in 2021, and it was one of these COVID batches, which was done completely remotely. The world felt very crazy back then. So everyone was dialing in just like for this exact call, right? So everyone was dialing in from anywhere in the world and participating remotely, and fundraising was also remote. It was just basically all done in Zoom. We joined when we were just two people, so me and my co-founder, with a prototype. So we already had a tool that existed on GitHub that was released in the earliest version. But of course, there was like not much back then. And I think at that point, it was the best thing that we could do. And we were very lucky to get in and get selected. Because what YC does, it is an accelerator program. It puts you inside a network of fellow startups that have similar problems or had them in the past. For example, for me, what was very important is we are an open source startup, and this is not like a easy thing to do, and it's not like everyone is doing open source, right? So I wanted to learn and talk to other open source founders, which are many in YC, and it was very important for me like to understand how to monetize it later, right? So how do you present it to investors? How do you build community around it? So just like building this support network was very important. And of course, YC gives you some visibility. And this is another benefit of programs like this and also GitHub for Startups, pretty much what I'm doing now, right? So more people will learn about it, evidently. I'm very happy to get feedback, to hear from people. So yeah, definitely recommend to check it out. If you want to know anything specific, let me know.
Awesome. No. And you answering that question, plus my fan Pedro saying open source for the win, actually
Hey.
brought up a question in my mind is like, why open source it? Like, what made you? Because I'm always curious. Like, sometimes people choose to open source their project, sometimes they say closed source it, sometimes they say open core. Why open source it? And then also, what were the strategies that you came up with to be able to still make money off of your project?
It will be
Your
open core, but you
open
start
core.
with open source, yeah. So for
Okay.
us, it was also we didn't decide to build an open source project from the very beginning. So I think this is kind of like interesting way how we arrived to it. When we were looking like, okay, we want to solve this monitoring problem. So we went and spoke to a lot of potential users, like data scientists, machine learning engineers, trying to figure out like how they would want to this problem solved, what they do now, what they do not. And it was like such a repeating theme that well, all data scientists, machine learning engineers, they work with open source, right? You have open source models, you have open source tools to build these models. So this is like a natural way how you consume software. And when we looked around, we figured out there was no open source project that does machine learning model monitoring. So it was just such a clear market opportunity, in addition to like a good, how you call it in a fancy way, go-to-market strategy. Because we expect, and that's what we see happening, that companies have inside them engineers just go and figure out which open source project can solve their problem. They bring it inside and they can test it really quickly. And when you work with enterprise companies, often the big problem is that it would take you months for them to even try your software. Security checks, how to transfer the data, and so on. So open source is a best way to do freemium for the enterprise users when the user is technical. In addition to this, there are additional like considerations. One is that evidently it's very extensible. So we calculated these metrics, but you might want to add additional metrics. And this is the nature of the problem. You might have like 90% of metrics that are usual and then 10% of things that are specific to what you do. And having this extensibility is very beneficial again for the user experience, right? So you can add some little tweaks because the code is out there and continue using the tool. But yes, eventually, and we are working on it right now, we are building a platform that will sit on top of the open source library. It will be on the cloud for those who do not want to run it on their own. And this is the monetization strategy that we're working towards.
Gotcha. So right now for the open source part, it's self-hosted. And
Yeah.
then you all are building on top. I love that. And I think even your reasoning made a lot of sense. A lot of machine learning engineers, I mean, I'm not super into the space, but I know they're using like open source things like Hugging Face or Replicate. So you already meeting people where they are. And rather than saying you have to pay to be able to use this, you get developers or super fans who are interested in your product, raving about the product, and willing to eventually pay for it, because they're like, oh, I already love this, now that it's on the cloud, yes, I'll do this. Or they'll tell other people and be like, oh, I've been using this, and like you should use it, and then other companies will start to adopt it as well, even though they may take a longer time. So I do think that was a great strategy.
You laid it perfectly. Yeah. So this is what we call a bottom-up adoption in a way, right? So someone brings it in the company as an end user, and then eventually you might be selling to like a director of data science or director of machine learning, someone who is higher up in the hierarchy, and they might be doing decision in a different way. But people
Yeah.
are already using the tool, right? It's already there. So it's kind of like a reason why they might prefer you compared to some closed source competitor.
Yeah, because they have familiarity. Love it.
Yeah.
Someone said, Alessandra said, open sourcing is an amazing principle and indeed very hard to monetize. However, what you just said, I think, is a great like way to monetize it.
There are
Okay.
examples, good for us, that laid the way.
Yeah. No, I talked to a lot of different open source projects too, and they kind of do like a similar thing, or maybe they're relying on sponsorship. They have all these different strategies that I think are like really smart and intelligent. I'm like, I would have never thought of that. Um my other question to you is just around like being a non-technical co-founder. Like, what how do you see your non-technical background like influencing the direction of the company? And then like my follow-up question is, well, I think you already said that you met your startup found or your CTO at the past startup, but do you have any advice for people who are looking for CTOs and they're more of a non-technical founder? So it was a long question, but like the first part is like, where how where's your influence, and like how do you guide the direction of the company? And then to like any advice for people who are non-technical but want to start a company in the ML space.
Mhm.
And yeah, but I also don't think you're like really non-technical because the way
Oh,
that you're
I can
speaking.
write code. I can write code nowadays. But yeah,
Yeah.
I don't do it for a living. But yeah, of course. I mean,
Okay.
been doing that for so many years, right? So you learn like that machine learning model, right? You learn from examples,
Yeah.
maybe without understanding the details. But
Yeah,
yeah,
because I
coming
was like, telling you that, but you're not. But sorry, go ahead.
yeah, well, I mean, I'm CEO of a developer tool startup, so I have to. But yeah, going back to your question, like what a non-technical co-founder does. Honestly, there is like a lot of non-technical things. Building a product is necessary, super important, right? It should be great. But there are things like figure out what you're building, right? So talk to these users, figure out their needs, understand like who are all their competitors. Like this is just a general kind of like definition of what the company should be doing, product whose problem it is solving. Then there is the question of fundraising. Unfortunately, like if you're doing a venture startup, that is like half the job of CEO is basically getting the company to get money. And this means talking to investors, presenting it, raising funds, then hiring, building people who will continue scaling the company. And there are a lot of jobs, like even in the like smallest team, for example, we are still pretty small. And I'm honestly writing a lot of documentation and I'm working with community, right? It's kind of semi-technical in the end, right? So, but these are the type of jobs that are non-development, right? So you're not writing code, but you're doing a lot of things to make this happen. And I know a few friends who have been CTOs or technical like people in the past. Their career was mostly like technical. When they become a CEO of the company because they love some idea, they actually drop coding because you have to do well everything else. You cannot be your own bottleneck, right? Maybe you wrote the first version, but if you are leading the company, now you have to hire other people to do what you love to do while setting the direction. So there are a lot of jobs inside the startup that are not related to writing the code.
That's true. There is a lot to do. I didn't even think about the fact that you might be helping out writing documentation because there's not that many people there. And yeah, that was a good point that sometimes you have to step away from the code even if you started off
Yeah.
being a person that codes. I noticed that even in like maybe like engineering teams when someone gets promoted to manager and they're still trying to write code but they seem stressed out and maybe they're not producing the most quality code. So it is important to delegate.
Yeah, context switching is probably the most horrible thing and difficult thing in running a startup, because one day you manage, another day you write the code, you talk to your lawyer, you talk to your investor, you talk to your user. It's all very different, like, modalities of how you behave, what you have to do.
Yeah, wow. Really quickly, someone asked if this is being recorded. Yes, it is. So if you did want to rewatch later, you can. Um, okay, so my other question to you is, so you did talk about like your approach to making this be funded is having open core, but do you have any advice for people in like building relationships with investors and doing pitches and stuff like that? Are there were there any struggles that you had initially that now you're like, oh, I've found a strategy on how to speak to investors that I don't know. I'm just curious.
Every time you fundraise, you do it kind of a different stage of the company. So your fundraising behavior also has to be different. Like in startup, you never repeat something. You learned your job, but now you have a new job to solve. So it's I kind of say like, you nail something because the next problem is going to be different. But talking about fundraising in general, first of all, not every startup has to be a venture funded startup. Not every company, not every open source project, right? So this is a decision to make. You might actually have a pretty great business without ever talking to VCs, right? Just by monetizing it through, well, revenue. It's not a very innovative idea, right? You might have some consulting revenue. You might just build a business, which is basically service business. Or maybe you have like a small SaaS project, and then you just, earn some money, but it's not going to become like $1 billion company. And that's, I kind of, it's even funny to say it's okay to not build $1 billion company, right? If it makes you happy, because venture funded startup is a very particular type of business. You rely on the external capital, and in return, you have to deliver outstanding growth so that to justify that investors give you this money. So you have to grow at a certain pace. You cannot just say, hey, I think I'm all right. I'm just going to keep this small team and never build anything else, right? So you have to choose what type of company you build, what is eventually your exit strategy. Are you building a company to do an IPO, right? Or are you just building a service business? So my one advice is just decide what you want to do and what type of business you want to run. I think there are other ways in addition to running a venture funded startup. But yeah, if you want to do a venture funded startup, you have to learn this, not game, but you have to learn how it works, because it is a bit also counterintuitive, right? You come with very little and ask for a lot of money with a promise to build a lot out of it, right? You have to learn like how to pitch it, and accelerators and many programs that help with this actually very, very useful here, because this is a bit counterintuitive. It's kind of type of sales that you do, right? When you talk to investors, how you present what you do, and yeah.
That makes sense. That's a good point. I didn't even really think about the fact that you may not have to be a venture capitalist. I mean, not venture capitalist. You may not have to get venture funding money for your company. You could do like bootstrapping or like open source or whatever. That's really interesting perspective. And I also didn't realize that you have to have a type of exit strategy, like whether you're gonna IPO or sell your company to another company. I didn't know you had to like think about that ahead of time. So thank you for that. Um so my other like questions, actually there's some questions in the chat that like I don't know if they're super related. So one question is like showing the real project. I will encourage you all to go on the GitHub repository and I'm going to find it right now just so people can get a chance
Yeah.
because oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say that there are a few examples of how you can deploy evidently within like different environments, but there is not an example of an actual machine learning project because we focus on the monitoring part. But you can find a lot of useful stuff in our
Gotcha.
account.
That was a good call out. So yeah, so you're not necessarily gonna have like you said, it's just gonna be more of the ML ops side, but check out the repository here, github.com/evidently AI/evidently if you want to see and learn more. This is more of a conversation on the journey of Elena's journey as a startup founder and getting into the ML space as well. Someone's asking, I don't know if, again, if this is as relevant, but we can still chat about it. Like, what's the relationships between like machine learning and ethics, I
I
guess.
think what's the relationship between technology and ethics? Machine learning is not very specific here, though it does bring like some problems that might not exist in other areas of technology, right? And
Yeah.
you can build models that are unethical, or you can use them for unethical purposes. You can have biased and irresponsible decisions, but you can also have them built by humans with deterministic systems without machine learning, right? But not joking, but to answer a question specifically, there is this direction called responsible AI, right? And in general, machine learning ethics. And there is a lot of conversation there happening related to how do you avoid bias in the systems, both when you, for example, select the data that you train the models on, right? And how do you catch and monitor it, going to my favorite topic, when the model is already in production. So there is a combination of practices and technological tools to try to avoid this. And I think awareness is really important. And probably we should not use machine learning in very high stakes decision where the potential errors of the model can bring harm to real people. And when we try to do this, do it very carefully with a lot of testing, with a lot of monitoring, and selecting the data sets in a very precise way, because a lot of issues that come, they do come from the data set. Like even with ChatGPT 3 that we're all like playing around these days, right? You know that, for example, it is trained on the data, on the corpus of the data from the internet, which already encodes certain biases, right? Because that's what people in the internet say. That's what the text on the internet do, right? So you have to be very careful understanding potential impact when you create the systems.
Yeah, completely agree with that. Definitely go and do your research, build with empathy. And I think even gut checking with other people around you or people in the AI machine learning space, and like, is this ethical? Do you think, what are your thoughts on this? Because I think sometimes with technology we build things because we're like, oh, this seems cool, but we don't think about like the different groups of people that it could affect, or how it could affect the world as a whole. And I like what you said, where you said this is not like a machine learning problem, it's a technology problem overall. I love that Pedro just highlighted
Thank you,
this.
Pedro.
Yes. Star the Evidently AI repository right now if you're really excited about this product. That's one small way, or small but impactful way, to contribute to an open source project or a company. Maybe you're like, oh, I'm not sure how to contribute code. Put a star. Show people that this is something that's exciting, and maybe even try using the product as well. Yeah, he kind of said, I want to encourage everyone to star. It helps more than you know.
Thank you, Pedro. May I comment on this a bit? I actually want you to encourage to put a star on, maybe not even evidently, but other repositories that you use, because open source maintainers, they actually allow, it's very important signal for investors if you have a venture fund, a startup. And I've learned talking to our users, especially sometimes data scientists and data analysts, that you don't even start any rep. You don't know why to do this. So I just want to share there is a reason. First of all, it's a way to say thank you and just to support the project that you like using. And also you might help the company that's to grow, because that's one of the metrics that investors actually look at. And yes, please start our rep if you like what we do.
Love that. And it's so interesting that investors actually look at that. I see
Oh, they
debates
do.
on Twitter. They do. Wow. Okay, that's good. Now I know. Because I see debates on Twitter where people are like, do stars really matter? Is it a vanity metric? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't know if they matter. I don't know who's using them, but
It,
apparently.
it is yes and no. Of course, you can just like hype up the stars and the project will not be used by anyone. But this is one of many signals, right? And who is actually starring is important, right? Like how many stars, like, what's the growth trend? Investors do look at this. Also forks, also GitHub used by. I literally track these metrics also, for example, for my startup.
Wow. Awesome. That's great.
So GitHub,
Okay.
GitHub is very important for us.
Yeah, no, that's I guess one of my other questions is like, how what GitHub tools has are you aware of that your company has leveraged? I know that you're using like the repositories obviously, but have y'all leveraged code spaces or Copilot yet, or like any of our security tools? I don't know, just out of curiosity. You don't have to have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, we use GitHub repository. The product is literally out there. We do use
Yeah.
issues, of course, because that's also how our users report some issues or bugs, and we kind of do all our development there, right? And it's very important for us. For me, it's even like one of the signals how I learned who's using Evidently is because someone opened an issue on GitHub. So for me, this is also like a community building tool. Yes, we also use GitHub Actions, and so this is the way how we design the development around it. We're considering using discussions, not yet, but yeah, so we're using GitHub extensively, like literally every day, everyone on the team, even if you're not writing the code.
That's really, really great to hear. I think, yeah, issues are so helpful and can be powerful. And just seeing like how are users feeling about the product. And I think the way that GitHub is advancing like the projects and issues feature where like you can automate things and all that, it's the improvement is really great from like compared to like when I first started coding to like now. It's like, oh, you can automate stuff and put labels, and it's just a way better way of organizing.
Yeah, it is. I must say the issues sometimes is a fun way of learning indeed who is using us. Like you might have like some bug in the release, and like you immediately see that someone reported an issue. You understand like, well, this must be a critical process running around it.
Yes, I love that. Yeah, that's true. It is a lot of insight. I'm like, oh, if this person thinks it's like a bug that's stopping them, that this is
Right.
something we need to work on, and now we know. I love that. My other question to you is like, how do you even prioritize like different features and like product development? Like, are you part of that process, and what factors do you consider when making those decisions? Because I think when having an open source product or startup, you get a lot of input from other people and like, oh, you should have this, you should have this, you should have this. But I'm wondering, does all their input take away from the direction of where you initially wanted the project to go? Like, how do you make sure you still serve users but you're going in a positive direction?
You nailed this question because it is so hard, especially with open source. There's like some kind of shared wisdom that when you build a tool, you should choose like your narrow segment and like this specific ideal user and build first for this user. It might work with closed source software because you're only showing it to these ideal users. But with open source, users just come. I mean, if you're lucky, you might have users from all sorts of companies, all sorts of size of the companies, different backgrounds, and they would actually ask you for different things simultaneously. So your choice is to decide like how do you prioritize them. And honestly, it's more art than science. So there is a certain vision that we execute towards, right? And there are certain like specific decision points after which we might review the roadmap. And when we arrive to this point, we heavily incorporate the feedback that we got from our users, but we also try to understand like where this feedback is coming from, because we need to try to figure out like what company, what is the workflow they're running. For example, like is it a computer vision model, or is it a text model? Is it a large model? Is it a small one? What tools you integrate with, to try to be a bit more coherent around it, because otherwise you would just like add a random set of features, eventually serving no one. So yeah, there is like a bit of a consolidation happening. And of course, if there's like bugs or small things or like small improvements, we try to implement it as fast as we can. But yeah, there is no easy answer here, especially with open source. So if anyone knows, let me know. But yeah, it's a combination of own roadmap, user feedback, interviews with users. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I actually really like that answer on one, it's hard, but you're doing a mixture of things to be able to stay in that direction. Quick highlight, someone asked for a demo, but we already kind of did one. So rewatch the you probably came in near the end, rewatch the stream, and you'll see the demo. And then we have another question that I love is, how do you structure your day as a startup founder? I imagine it's busy. And like you said, with context switching, and I kind of relate as a developer advocate. Sometimes I'm coding. Sometimes I'm doing a Twitch stream. Sometimes I'm like writing documentation. So yeah.
I'm a big planner, so I have like a list of tasks that I have to do for the week, but I also try to batch them because, yeah, otherwise it would have been impossible. So, for example, today is my calls day. So today I'm talking to people, right? Then there would be like a more quiet day. Then I will be writing documentation, like looking at what competitors are doing, reading some content. So I'm trying to batch my days or hours within the days because otherwise it would have been completely impossible to achieve anything. But yeah, I do a lot of different things depending on where we are at the stage of the company. And I might have to work on very different things. Like, for example, we are working towards a big launch in July, right? So now I'm thinking about like planning this launch, what we need to do, what materials we need to develop, these sort of things. After this launch happens, I might be in the mode of talking to users a lot to now hear their feedback. So there's going to be like a lot of calls, a lot of talking to early testers of this new feature and so on. So it varies month to month, day to day, but I do try to like plan it ahead and batch it. And honestly, I would recommend it to everyone because especially for developers, like when you have a day disrupted, by 3 calls at random times, it's very hard to achieve anything in between them.
Yeah, I relate. When there's too many meetings, I'm like, I did not get anything done. And then everyone's like, is the work done? I'm like, no, because I was just in the meetings. Someone said, interesting approach to work, batching. I may have to try that approach. I think it's a good approach. Yeah. Um, my last two questions to you are like, what's been the most rewarding part for you of leading a startup? And then, well, yeah, let's do that one first, and then I'll go to the next one to not overwhelm.
Users, it's so exciting. And when you do something, like you sit quietly in your room, do something, your co-founder does the same, and then one day you actually have real users, and they come to you and they complain and they ask for some things and they say thanks to you. And this is every time, like it's so amazing. Like when people say thank you for doing this, for building a great tool, and in general they give you feedback that shows that they actually building the processes around it. So yes, it's hugely rewarding. It honestly makes my day every time someone does it. I share it with other team members as well, like good feedback. So yeah, this is super rewarding. You do something, it is used by real people, it helps them solve something. This is the best thing that you can do.
Yes, I love that because yeah, it makes it worth it. You're like someone's using this, like it's
Yeah.
helpful and useful for somebody. And then like I'm just curious if you have any like success stories or like milestones that you achieved that you're excited about and willing to share.
Well, getting into Y Combinator was a big success and big achievement for us, right? And then basically propelled our company in a different direction. That was very important. Then I think like we had a stable release in December. That was also like a big thing because it's still a lot of things to be done, right? It never works perfectly, but this was like a huge milestone. So we implemented a set of features that we were looking forward to implement, and it still took time, right? So that was a great one. And now we're working towards a new release, which will be a unified UI, basically like a nice dashboard that collects everything from Evidently together. So yeah, for now, it's mostly product releases. We also have like some great users, but yeah, unfortunately, cannot share specific use cases here yet.
Totally okay, and I love that. Like getting into Y Combinator, that's an achievement. I just like to see people be excited and figure out like what made you happy. Yeah. um. So, before I have like some questions, like some fun questions I usually ask. But before we do that, I wanted to know like how can viewers support you? Should like in addition to starring the repository and maybe contributing, is there anything else they can do? Follow you on Twitter, or do you have an event coming up?
So the next best thing to starting the repo is actually trying this thing. To be honest, it's even the most important one. So if you're a data scientist or machine learning engineer, please check out Evidently. Tell us if it helps with in your work, if it works, if it does not. Really, feedback is always super appreciated. And yes, you can follow us on Twitter. You can join our Discord if you want to ask questions. And we also have a YouTube channel. And you can see it all in our repo and on our website. So I think you shared the link to the repository on the top there. There are all the other links. And if you'd want to see a additional demo, we do a monthly demo. So the next one, I think, is on the 22nd of June. So you can also, if you go on the website, there will be like a pop-up inviting. So for anyone who wants to see a more technical demo, more lengthy, please join the next one.
Love that. All right, y'all. So just to reemphasize, bookmark evidently.ai so you can get that monthly technical.
Evidently, AI.com.
Oh, sorry. What?
Yeah,
Thank you. Oh my God. Let me edit
yeah,
that. AI.com. I'm so used to people doing .ai. Hold
yeah.
on.
We need to take that one.
You evidentlyai.com to be specific. So bookmark that so you can be able to like get the technical demo, maybe get links to the Discord if you want to join, and then definitely try out the project so that you know she'll be able to have feedback of how's the process for you, how's the experience. So let's see if there's anything else. Someone just said had a swift look at your repo, really nice work.
Thank
um
you.
yeah, just it looks like they're going to keep an eye out and they're really excited about it. Okay, switching into the random questions that I asked, they're just for fun. What's like your most used emoji?
So I checked in my conversations in the recent ones. So apparently I do use a lot of like, this smiley with hearts in the eyes. Uh,
Oh, I like
when I,
that.
when I get excited, last time my co-founder sent me a screenshot of our like newly coming interface, and that's what I put. So I guess I'm very excited. And the next one is I like to laugh, like laugh as much as you're almost crying. That emoji. So yeah, I guess I'm exaggerating my emotions a bit.
I love that. No, I checked my most used. It's the one where they're crying because I'm like, I'm usually, oh, my camera. Oh no. I think it overheated. Hopefully it comes back. But I'm usually like, okay, there we are. I'm usually like real crying or like laughing crying that like
Laughing,
tears
crying.
are.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That one I do.
Other question is like, what's your favorite app on your phone?
uh, what's my favorite app? That will be the boring one. I think it's my messenger and my mail. Nothing exciting.
Love it. I think someone showed their favorite emoji is the cat. And yeah, I mean, you're a startup founder. You're always going to be in your messages or your mail
Yeah.
if people are asking you things. Um okay, what was like the I don't know if this is like a tough question, but like the least enjoyable job you ever had? Like for me, I realize I'm not good at retail jobs. Like that's not my strong suit at all.
I had a fun story. I once joined this startup that was like many, many years ago, one of my first jobs. And the
Yeah.
startup, after some time, decided to close a direction that I was working on. But before letting
Oh
everyone go, they basically wanted you to work for 3 months on a direction that will no longer be used. And I was like so unhappy and so annoyed by this that I actually went to the founders and I was like, can I do something else and like invent my own job, even though like nothing was expected from me, because I
no.
just couldn't do something that has like no purpose. So for me, when I don't see purpose in what I do, this is the worst. But even if it's a retail job, but I see a purpose, I think I would figure that out. But I need to have
Yeah.
purpose or to invent it for myself. Otherwise, it's the worst.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. You're like, I want a reason that I'm doing this. I like the way you put that. I'm not sure why I don't like retail, but it's not for
Oh,
me.
that's a hard job. I mean, sitting on in my desk is much easier.
Yeah. Um, and then my last question, I usually you could say whichever one. I usually used to ask people what's their favorite Beyonce song, but some people didn't have a favorite Beyonce song. So just what's your favorite song in general, if you want to share?
I don't think I have a favorite song, but I'm like more in the old school Brit pop rock sort of crowd. So yeah,
Okay.
not Beyonce.
That's your genre is Britpop rock. I like that. That's cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So I think one other person put their emoji. There's a wink. That was cool. Um, I can't wink. You probably just saw me. I tried, but I don't know how. Um, I'll just wrap up by telling people that next week we are having another started up for Wednesday or started up Wednesday episode. So tune in next week Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern for another similar really casual but fun and educational conversation. I do want to thank Elena so much for being here, sharing your knowledge and your time. I know it's like 7 o'clock by you, so really appreciate that. And then also thank you to the people in the comments. I love the engagement. I love people encouraging people to start repositories and just trying to learn more about machine learning. Again, please try to support by going to github.com/evidentlyi/evidently or evidentlyi.com. Is there
Arctic
any last?
monkeys is great. Someone suggested if I like Arctic monkeys. Yeah, that's a good one.
Oh, awesome.
And thank you so much for the fun conversation and for everyone dialing in.
Of course. All right, y'all. Have a great rest of your Wednesday. Bye.
Bye.